you very much, and it is a great privilege to speak at this meeting, which underscores the global character of our party's fight for the freedom of Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, and all imprisoned whistleblowers, journalists and publishers. I must say that the events in Britain defending Assange, whether they've been organised by the JADC, the SEP or other organisations, have had a huge impact in Australia and internationally. They've given expression to the immense popular sympathy for Assange here in the country that's holding him as a political prisoner and preparing to hand him over to the war criminals in Washington. They've demonstrated that on the Assange case, as on every other major issue, there are two Britons. On the one hand, the official political parties, the Johnson government, the intelligence agencies and the military, and on the other, millions of workers and young people who are entering into major struggles for their social and democratic rights. It's the British authorities that are holding the key to Assange's cell, but they couldn't have trampled on all of his legal and democratic rights as they have, were it not for the criminal role played by successive Australian governments. Since 2010, all of them have refused to defend Assange, despite the fact that he's a persecuted Australian citizen and journalist. Instead, they've been among the most enthusiastic participants in the US-led vendetta against Assange and have given succour to all of the lies and slanders that are being used to isolate him. Indeed, Australian governments have been out in front when it comes to the government attempts to shut WikiLeaks down. In 2009, that is a year before the publication of Collateral Murder and the Iraq and Afghan war logs, Julian revealed that he was avoiding spending time in Australia. He said he'd received a tip-off that if he returned to his country of origin, he would be raided by the Australian Federal Police on the orders of the then Labor government. The reason was that in 2009, WikiLeaks had released Labor's secret list of blacklisted websites. The publication revealed that contrary to government claims, the targeted sites included political and news websites which had nothing to do with illegal content, that is, out-and-out political censorship. Now in 2010, when WikiLeaks released the truly historic publications for which Assange has been charged, the Greens-backed Labor government of Julia Gillard reacted with unbridled hostility. Gillard fronted a press conference in December 2010 at which she declared, quote, "The foundation stone of the WikiLeaks organisation is an illegal act." She pledged to aid the US authorities in their campaign to destroy Assange. Now, Gillard said this the same time that senior US politicians were calling for Assange to be assassinated. The transparent purpose of her statement was to block any prospect of Assange's return to Australia and to promote the lies that he was a cyber terrorist. The Australian police were subsequently compelled to state that Assange and WikiLeaks, in fact, had committed no crime under Australian law. Now, it should be noted that since leaving Parliament, Gillard has reinvented herself as a champion of women's rights. She's appeared at speaking events alongside Hillary Clinton, at which the two persecutors of Assange have been lauded by the corrupt representatives of the upper middle class as feminist heroes. The collaboration in the US-led vendetta against Assange has been continued by every Australian government since. Current Conservative Prime Minister Scott Morrison has declared that no one is above the law and that Assange must face the music. After he was fawned over by Donald Trump during a visit to Washington late last year, an Australian reporter asked Morrison whether the two had discussed Assange. Morrison simply laughed. The Labor Party opposition's response has been no less criminal. Senior Labor leader Tanya Plibersek responded to Assange's arrest on April the 11th by sharing a tweet that declared, quote, "There are many cultists on this site, but the Assange cultists are the worst." The senior Labor figure branded Assange as a foreign agent guilty of fascist behaviour and of seeking to undermine democracy. In November, Labor MPs shut down one of the only discussions in the Australian Parliament over the past 12 months over Assange's plight using anti-democratic procedural rules. The hostility of the Australian political and media establishment towards Assange is completely tied to their support for the US military alliance and all of Washington's predatory wars and military preparations. This connection was exemplified by the Gillard government. In 2011, Gillard hosted Barack Obama as he announced from the floor of the Australian Parliament a massive military build-up throughout the Asia-Pacific directed against China, the so-called pivot to Asia. Gillard signed a secret military agreement with Obama, which included the establishment of a new US Marine base in Northern Australia and virtually unlimited access to existing Australian bases for US troops. This was on top of the already existing Pine Gap spy base in Central Australia. Operated by the CIA, it's involved in coordinating all US drone strikes in the Middle East and North Africa. Edward Snowden also revealed that Pine Gap plays a key role in the NSA's mass surveillance program. Now, in the think tanks and foreign policy journals in Australia, it's openly discussed that the country has been placed on the front lines of US plans for war with China. This agenda, imposed behind the backs of the population, has been accompanied by rafts of national security legislation and an anti-China campaign aimed at whipping up a wartime atmosphere. Australia's support for the persecution of Assange is also bound up with the attempts of the ruling elites to suppress mounting social and political opposition. We've seen how explosive the situation is over the past several months. Almost overnight, all of the myths about Australia being the lucky country and the land of a fair go were exposed as lies by one of the worst bushfire crises in decades. The fires killed 33 people and destroyed more than 2,300 homes. The catastrophe was not a natural disaster. It was the direct result of government funding cuts, including to firefighting services, and the refusal of every government to tackle the climate change crisis. Prime Minister Scott Morrison, who had been lauded in the financial press just months before as a force for stability, has now become a figure of mass hatred, a symbol of the contempt of the ruling elites for the needs and the very lives of ordinary people. The political establishment is aware that it sits atop a social powder keg. That's why the Australian government has been among the most aggressive in deploying the Assange precedent. In June last year, the Australian Federal Police raided the Sydney headquarters of the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, the ABC. The raid targeted journalists who had revealed evidence of Australian war crimes in Afghanistan, including the killing of civilians and the desecration of corpses. The day before, the Federal Police had raided the home of a News Corp political editor for exposing government plans to expand mass domestic spying. In both cases, the journalists could still face prosecution. Now, it's no coincidence that those raids were carried out only weeks after the Trump administration released its Espionage Act indictment of Assange. Last week, a federal court upheld the legality of the raid on the ABC. In language that could have been borrowed from the US indictment of Assange, the Australian judge cited as precedent a ruling which declared, quote, "The public interest in national security necessarily outweighs the public interest in the free flow of information." The raids followed the bipartisan passage of foreign interference laws in 2018. They provide for prison sentences for whistleblowers and journalists who expose national security material. Under the new laws, it's an offence for a journalist even to receive classified government information in an email from a whistleblower. In parliamentary submissions, WikiLeaks has warned that the new legislation would directly threaten its own publishing activities were it based in Australia. In other words, as Assange has stated, the attacks against him are only the sharpest expression of a much broader assault on press freedom. Our experiences in Australia have demonstrated the essential point that's being raised in this meeting. That is that the fight for Assange's freedom requires the political mobilisation of the working class. It's not going to be achieved through Parliament or through the official political parties. Since Assange's arrest last year, the Australian Greens, the pseudo-left groups and the unions have done nothing to mobilise opposition to his persecution. Many here will have seen the visit to Belmarsh Prison by Australian MPs Andrew Wilkie and George Christensen last week. They're the co-chairs of a cross-party group of Australian parliamentarians calling for Assange to be brought home. It must be stressed that this group was formed in October, and prior to Wilkie and Christensen's British tour, it had literally held no public events or initiatives in the 4 months since. I think the MPs came here after considerable pressure was applied by defenders of Assange and democratic rights. Their visits were only a pale reflection of the immense support that exists for Assange among workers and young people. I want to provide just a few examples. Earlier this month, a petition demanding freedom for Assange was tabled in Parliament. It's been signed by over 280,000 people, making it one of the largest in the 120 years of the Australian Parliament. Last week, the Hills Association of Sydney Schools passed a motion which declared, quote, "We insist that the federal Morrison government use its diplomatic powers to organise the safe return of Assange to Australia. We resolve to send this resolution to other schools and workplaces." The committee which passed that motion represents 1,300 teachers across Sydney, and their action followed a similar motion passed by teachers at a working class school in Western Melbourne demanding freedom for Assange. It won an international audience after being featured on Jimmy Dore's popular online show. For many years, support for Assange has been suppressed, but now it's coming to the surface, and I think we can anticipate that it will grow substantially over the coming weeks and months. I want to finish by citing a comment made by Terry Hicks to the WSWS last year in support of Assange. Terry's son, David Hicks, was arrested by the US military in Afghanistan in 2001. He was taken to Guantanamo Bay and subjected to torture, despite the fact that he was guilty of no crime. For years, Terry waged a one-man campaign for his son's freedom. In the end, he built a powerful grassroots movement that forced the Australian government to take action to have David Hicks released from Guantanamo Bay and returned to Australia. Comments to us last year, Terry said, "You might get support from high-profile people, but the fight to gain Julian's freedom depends on ordinary people speaking out. You will win them if you explain the basic issues at stake, such as freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and democratic rights, and you will be respected for your determination and your honesty. Always remember that the story constantly alters for those who lie, but if you're telling the truth, then nothing changes, and the real story will eventually come out." So I think those are fine words as we begin the next stage in the fight for Julian Assange's freedom. Thank you.